Betty Krawczyk is a raging granny, an 83-year-old great-grandmother who has spent 3 years in prison for her environmental convictions, particularly her unapologetic opposition to highway construction and irresponsible logging of old-growth forests. More recently, she's taken up the cause of aquaculture and genetically modified farm fish. She's run for office on several occasions, and she's written 4 books. She has 8 children and 8 grandchildren, and as an ecofeminist, she proposes to devote the rest of her life to trenchant opposition to the forces responsible for what she calls societal and ecological breakdown. I didn't set out to become a rebel, she says. It just happened in the natural order of searching for a meaning to my life. You've become famous as the great-grandmother who goes to jail for the environment.
A lot of people would say I'm much more infamous than famous. But as long as I feel that I'm doing what I think I should do, that I would be unhappy if I didn't do it, then in a sense, it doesn't matter what people say about it. It does matter in one way, that you want people to listen to you, so you want their good opinion of you. Otherwise, they will dismiss what you have to say. But at the very deepest level, I do it because I can't do otherwise. And with this in mind and in my heart, I'm not discouraged by what people say who think I'm just a silly old lady, you know, running around the forest in tennis shoes and acting like crazy women. So I'm satisfied with it.
Yeah. How much time have you spent in prison?
I've spent over 3 years in prison. So 3 years and some months. That's 4 different blockades.
And that started when you were already a grandmother, right?
Yes, I was, the first time I was in prison, I celebrated my 65th birthday in prison, and that was over the Clayoquot Sound blockades.
So what you've been doing has obviously been getting under their skin, because you don't go around sending 65-year-old women to prison unless they become extremely annoying, right?
Well, this is it. And the difference in my approach to the courts is that by their giving out injunctions to logging companies that says that anybody who goes into this area is guilty, will then be guilty of contempt of court, because a court order, an injunction is a court order the judge gives, so that when you get into court, you're not up against the logging company or the other law officials. You're up against the judge who wrote this order, and judges protect each other's orders. So you're guilty of contempt of court unless you apologize to the judge and attempt to make restitution. My feeling about this is that I refuse to apologize to the judge. I refuse to sign any promise that I would not go back to where I was arrested, which is called an undertaking. I wouldn't sign an undertaking because I believe that I had a right to be there. These are public forests, and they are a right given to the people of Canada and to British Columbia to enjoy their public forest, and that tree farm license given by the government of British Columbia does not validate the right of people to be in their forest and to protect and protest what is being done there in their name. These tree farm licenses are given out in our name. And so when I'm before the court, I refuse to apologize. I don't believe I've done anything wrong. I do this from conviction that we should not be devastating the earth anymore, and that tree farm license logging, the way they clear cut, commercial logging, industrial logging, is a crime. It's a crime against nature, and it's a crime against us. And we really, really should not stand for it. And hopefully in the future, more people will recognize that We mustn't stand for this because it's our earth. It's the forests here affect everybody all over the world. They affect climate everywhere. They are carbon sinks. They also create climate. What is wrong with us that we sit around and watch our forests be destroyed by greedy corporations and governments who are so morally deficient that they care more about the campaign funds they're receiving than they do about the life and the health of their own citizens and of the world. We have morally deficient governments in relation to the environmental destruction that's being wreaked upon this earth. And Harper, in my opinion, is also morally deficient in that he approves every action that is destructive. Perhaps not every single one, but the vast majority he approves of all of the pipeline that's going between our country and the U.S. He approves of oil tankers, he approves of mining or logging, whatever, as does our own provincial government. Premier Christy Clark has also let it be known that she's going to approve 8 mines soon in her tenure, that we can look forward to more logging, more mining, more destruction of our province with threats of oil tankers, threats of fracking that is extremely destructive to get gas out of the ground. It doesn't look good.
No, it does not. But not many people have been as determined as you. And well, one of the appalling things about the contempt power is that you're deemed to be guilty when you go in there, right? There's no presumption of innocence with the contempt power. You're in there because you already have been found guilty, and the only way out is to prostrate yourself before the power of the courts, right?
Absolutely, that's the only way. And everybody knows what the outcome of these trials are going to be. They're simply sham trials. And I appealed the last one on the grounds that it was a sham, that everybody knows what the outcome is going to be. And yet a judge gave me a 2-week trial with with over 20 witnesses, and knowing very well that she was going to convict me, that everybody connected with this trial knew that I would be convicted. The Crown attorneys love, the prosecutors love to see me come into court because they know it's going to be a really easy job. They don't actually have to do anything because the judge will do all the
and you will
scolding.
too, because you're not going to do anything really to get out of it.
That's right. Yeah. So it's such an easy job for them. They just love it. But they'll come in with briefcases this thick, like this is some some important question of justice. Well, of course it is. Mm-hmm. However, they're not about to pursue it in that sense.
Yeah, yeah. Well, if I go back through what I know of your background, you seem to have been sort of awakened in terms of what we might almost call political morality by the 2 great issues of race and war in the 1960s and 70s. And then with the environmental stuff, it was beginning. The first thing was old growth logging, Clayoquot Sound, but since then highway construction and now things like Frankenfish. What determines the ones that get your blood boiling to the point that you're willing to take this kind of stand for them?
The ones that are just so egregiously horrible, that are so insulting to the earth and to human beings, and that there's no mitigating factors that this should happen, and that they should try to defend it, the ones who are perpetuating it, so that my father was a fundamentalist minister, and though I broke from this concept relatively early, the idea that you do owe something back to your culture sort of stayed with me. Whatever your culture is, whether it's right or wrong, and mine was so wrong. It was so racist and sexist and such religiosity that they could twist around that supported all these gross human rights violations.
We're in the deep south now, right?
In
Louisiana.
In Louisiana. That it was terribly wrong culture, honestly. But the idea that my parents tried to figure out what was right within the tools of the culture. My mother had gone to college, but my father had not. They were Southerners, that was all they knew, and yet they tried to get on the other side of this, and so that stuck with me, that you try to analyze your society as best that you can, as conditioned as you are. You owe it to the universe at large to try to figure it out. So that's what I got from them, and stayed with me through the racist culture that I grew up in. And as a young woman with children in school, when this happened, when my sons came home and told me that the schools were talking about shutting down rather than integrate, the order had come that they must integrate. Schools in New Orleans were shutting down, or the parents were boycotting them, and there was only one couple that I clung to idealistically. It was a Unitarian minister and his wife in New Orleans who sent their two little white children, they were white, to a school that was where the National Guard had to escort in three little black girls. That this minister and his wife were the only ones who sent their children into the school. All the other, so that struck my heart, and I thought, oh my gosh, well, they're there, and so I can rely on them, and I did. And it was hard because I lost most of the friends I had from childhood. I was boycotted in the neighborhood, garbage was thrown on the lawn, even had some death mail. But in the end, it was a good lesson, because you know what? It was the toughest thing I have ever done in my entire life. Yeah. And standing in front of a logging truck, honestly, doesn't fill me with fear and trembling the way that did when I stood up in church and said that this church is hypocritical. These people are our neighbors. If they're not our neighbors, who are they? And you don't stand true to your own teaching, which is love your neighbor as yourself. And I'm leaving, and I'm never coming back. It's too hypocritical to be born. So that's what I did.
Wow, that is impressive. But you know, your story about the Unitarian couple really reinforces the power of an example. That tells you you're not alone.
Yes.
And you have also a very touching story about your father rescuing a drowning man.
That's right.
There's another example. Tell us that story.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Well, we didn't get into Baton Rouge very often. We lived out in the country. It was bordering a small swamp, wetland. It was really country. And but we were going into Baton Rouge after it had been raining quite a bit. And if we took this shortcut, it would save some time. It'd get us onto the main road quicker than if we just started off on the main road. So we were a couple of miles into this country road. It went across this creek that we always cross, but there was a flash flood, and my father stopped because the creek was really swollen. There was a truck that had stopped beside us that had two men had been in the truck, and they were on the outside of the truck looking at the river. They were specifically looking at an old truck that was partially submerged in the water that was really raging, and it was still rising. And it was a black man who was screaming for help because he was caught. He was pinned somehow underneath the edge of the truck, and he couldn't get loose. And these two men were just standing there watching. They were white men, and my father got out and he said, "Well, what are you guys doing here? Why aren't you over there helping this fellow out?" And this one guy said, "Oh, I'm not a good swimmer, and I'm not gonna go get that guy because I'm liable to drown myself." And the other guy said, "Yeah," he says, "I'm not risking my life for and he used the N word." And my father was furious, and he started raging at them. And at this point, he wasn't even a minister. He was still a sinner. So he started just chewing them out good. You know, "You guys, you stand here, you call yourself men, you call yourself Christians." And I have to tell you, everybody in the South is a Christian. If you say you're not a Christian, well, that's a huge insult. And he says, "You're not a Christian. You think God doesn't see you. God sees you right now, and he sees what cowards you are standing here watching another man drown. That's a man." And finally they said, "All right." So my father came over to my mother. My mother was worried because my father really wasn't a good swimmer either. I could swim better than my father. I knew he wasn't a good swimmer, but he was taking off his shoes and his jacket and shirt. And my mother says, "You be careful, Jake. You just be careful out there." And he said, "Don't worry, I'm coming back." And so all three of them went out there, and they turned the truck over, and they got this guy out. And he left and went on the other side where he lived on the other side of the creek. So and my mother and father didn't talk about that hardly at all afterwards. I never heard them even mention it to friends and relatives, but it made a huge, huge impression on me. Really huge impression on me, and I never forgot that if you think something is wrong, and you have to right it or attempt to right it, even if you die in the attempt, it's okay. It's okay, because some way that I didn't understand then, and I really still don't understand now, you're contributing to the evolution of human thought and human will and human knowledge. And yes, it made a huge impression on me, so that I don't hesitate when I know that it's a matter of utmost importance that this either goes or it be stopped. And even if it's just symbolic, even if you know in the long run it can't go, you do it anyway, because in a sense you're doing it for yourself. You're doing it for yourself. Every person is a human being who is evolving. And it's when you're pitted against something that's a huge challenge that you learn about yourself and about life and about what's important and what isn't. I feel blessed, actually, to have had these opportunities to contribute in any way that I could to the concept of peaceful civil disobedience in the face of egregious wrongs and crimes.
A quote from you: "For me, the environment became an issue of what I am leaving my children, my grandchildren, the world's grandchildren. The environment rather became a culmination of all ills in the world."
Yes, it's true. And this happened, I came to realize this when I came back to British Columbia, and I had been in love with British Columbia ever since I'd first seen it in 1967. And I knew that when my children were settled in the world, then I would go back to Clackfoot Sound, which I had seen and just was totally fascinated with. And so I went there to retire. I wanted to write about the flora and fauna of the area because not much had been written about it. And while I'm not a naturalist, I'm an amateur sort of naturalist in a sense, where I notice the animals and what I know how to look up what kind they may be. So I wanted to write about that. Instead, when I got there, my son had built a frame for me 9 miles into the Sound, and at that time it was real wilderness, and I was living sort of a homesteading kind of life with just enough power to run my word processor. And so I was just having a wonderful time, just engaging with nature. But then I started exploring back around into the Sound and saw all these clear cuts. I could not believe it. I could not believe the devastation. Whole mountainsides were stripped to the bone. And I heard that the landslides, even on further back, were tremendous. Now, at that time, there was a moratorium on cutting in the Clackfoot Sound because there was so much controversy around it. But then I heard that Premier Harcourt was given the okay to resume clear cutting. And so I spent weeks there trying to settle my mind on this clear cutting business, because I'm consider myself working class, or even when I'm kind of have oscillated back and forth between working class and middle class, my values are working class. And I knew that if I joined a blockade, that this would hurt working people around Ucluelet, where John and I had bought a little house from the girls to be there, and when things got for a retreat. And so I knew these people, and it hurt me that I had to make this choice. But in the end, I couldn't stand the devastation, because it did seem to me that the heart of the racism in Louisiana had to do with the economy. It had to do with slavery. It had to do with sexism, the way black women were treated by white men sexually. And that sexism in itself had as its roots economics, poverty and inequality, and wars were fought over territory and resources, and that it all had to do with one group of people, or some few groups of people getting together and decide to take something away from some other group of people, and that all of the isms, the sexism, the racism, the excessive capitalism, all of this at its root had to do with the way that the alpha males in these corporations and in these banking systems considered the natural world. They considered it as something simply to be exploited, just as they considered these third world peoples as something to be exploited, just as they considered women to be exploited. So it all came down at that point for me that this destruction of the earth was a sickness, and it was the illness that that was making everybody sick. The ones who perpetuated it, the ones who benefited from it, the ones who were destroyed by it. It made us all sick, and it wouldn't get well until we looked at the earth as a living being. And I'm with Dr. Lovelock on this. For me, it is a living being, that it has a temperature, it has a aura, it has a mind. I believe it has a mind that is independent from the everyday workings of the natural world. And I believe we have destroyed it to a point to where there may be such serious repercussions that that the human race, along with many other species, may be in danger of living. If I had to describe myself, I would say, yes, I'm a deep ecologist. Nothing can exist without a healthy earth. This concept that computer people have, that this mechanistic view of oh, well, it's all a matter of somehow of math and physics, and you isolate this problem and you can make robots to do this. Without the earth, they act as though it exists, as though the information highway exists independently of the earth. And that is so stupid. It's not just dumb. It's not just dumb. It's incredibly stupid, and it's going to kill us all. And I believe that women have not come together in significant ways to be able, as a group, to protest this kind of thinking that is bringing the destruction. Because I do believe, and I know there are all kinds of controversy around, are women closer to the earth? Are they more of earth mothers because they have children? And this has been sneered at in the past. My answer is yes, they actually are, because you make the baby, you nourish the baby, you tend it till it's grown. Of course, you're more cognizant of the fluidness, the cycles of life and death, because as a woman, you have been designated by nature to be the primary person who carries forth the survival of the species. And while there are many, many caring men who really love and care for and protect their families, on the whole, women have more of a concept of life and death. A birth has always been a risky business for women until just lately. The act of birth is something that plunges you into the animal world, whether you will or nil. Men can stand aside from this. They are not drawn into the animal world in the same way that women are. So they can pretend that they stand apart from the animal world, they stand apart from nature, that they have a handle on the whole thing, and women are more animalistic because they are caught in this reproduction cycle. But the crime has been in the thinking as not incorporating this animal world into the prominent or predominant thinking of the masculine world. It has to be included. If it's not included, it's a stupid mind. Men and women have different minds, and one without the other, as the masculine world has tried to pretend that theirs is the only mind, is a stupid mind, because it can't think in comprehensive and holistic ways unless the female mind is drawn into it, with always the thought there the presence there is that we are creatures of nature. We have to obey nature's laws because nature has the power to reinforce her laws. You think she doesn't have that power? She has that power, and she is doing it now. So we have to change that thinking.
You've started so many themes there that I want to pursue, but I want to go. I do want to come back to that whole question of women and the feminine mind and outlook. But But you said something really fascinating when you said that the environmental issue was for you really fundamental in that if a person who thinks that he stands aside from the environment and is entitled to manipulate it, own it, control it, and exploit it, and so on, it follows absolutely naturally that he would feel the same way about other people, other animals, other, but it starts really with the idea that you can exploit the world.
Mm-hmm.
And then it goes on quite naturally to the other exploitation. I hadn't really thought of that before, that the exploitation is all one thing and it comes from that primal, I'm in charge of nature thing. Yeah, that's a fascinating insight that I will be thinking about that for some time. You also said, you've got some wonderful, there's some wonderful comments in your writing. At one point you said your children always breathe a sigh of relief when you're locked up.
Yes, they do. It's pathetic. Because they know that when I'm on a blockade, that there are high tensions surrounding a blockade. The workers are fighting for their jobs. They have mortgages, they have kids in college, they have all sorts of bills, as everyone does. And this really is all they know to do, or primarily their working life has been this. You don't have to have a lot of education to become a logger, or you have to have experience, and I'm not denigrating in any way the experience that these men have, because to fell a tree, to operate this machinery, a lot of it takes a high degree of skill, and it's dangerous. Loggers are killed in their profession at a higher rate than any other profession. Trades profession, and so I don't denigrate or put down or look down on what they do. They do an honest day's work for their pay, but they just don't see that the work that they are doing is contributing to the destruction of the earth, of the whole. So your kid's feeling is that you're putting yourself in a position where very serious issues are at stake for quite a lot of people who do not agree with you, and that you're safer locked up. Is that a fair statement of it? Because there have been a lot of, you get threatened. Now, I have to say that no logger or CEO of a logging company or any kind of worker in the logging industry has ever directly insulted me. I have to say that. They just don't. They stop short of insulting me. Now they do shout and say insulting things to younger people, particularly younger guys, and they'll make sexist remarks to young women who are on the blockade, but none of them have ever said anything to me that was insulting. So I give them credit for that. However, my children have seen that how angry the loggers can get, the employees can get, and they do worry because sometimes at night things happen that can be scary, and but I tell them, and I told them from the beginning, I used to sort of encourage them to come with me to take part, to come to court. but I've stopped doing that relatively early because of the fear that they can take it out on your children, and they certainly can. But even in Ucluelet during the Clayoquot Sound mass blockades, after I got out of prison, I was a pariah in the village. However, my children were not. By this time, three of my daughters were teaching in Ucluelet, 2 in the school system and 1 had a ballet school. And that seemed to go on as before. They separated me from my children's activities. And one of my daughters said, you know, I was at a party the other night and somebody asked me if you were my mother, and I said, no, I belong to that other group of camps. There were 2 groups of camps and their names. She said, no, I belong to that other group. But she was just kidding, I think, I'm not sure. And sometimes they would really worry and get angry with me, but they've learned now to accept that, my goodness, I'm 83 years old. You know, if something happens to me now, whoa. What a way to go,
well,
you know.
Yes. You know, you would love it. James Lovelock is when I interviewed him, was 90, and he was looking forward. He's a friend of Sir Richard Branson, Sir Richard Branson of the Virgin, and Virgin Atlantic is going to do a space flight.
Right.
Commercial space flight.
Uh-huh.
And he's offered Lovelock a seat on that flight, and Lovelock is
he accepted?
he can't wait to go. And I said, he said, my wife worries about it a little bit. He said, but I say, I'm 90 years old. If I don't come back, what a way to go. Isn't that great?
Right.
So no
Well,
wonder
we're of the same mind.
Yeah, clearly so. Now, one of your most recent preoccupations is aquaculture, and particularly frankenfish.
Yes.
Tell me about how you got interested in that and what your sense of that issue is.
I got into fish, period, from living here in British Columbia and living in the Clayoquot Sound close to a fish farm. And there was only one young woman, I think, who was working at the fish farm at the time that I was living in the cabin. And she used to stop by and have a coffee with me once in a while before she would go to work. And she was concerned that they were shooting seals who would come up attracted by the fish. And she was very concerned about that and angry. And then one day she came and she said, it was her last day she was quitting. And I said, are they still shooting seals? And she said, no, but they're using fish that have been sex changed, and that she didn't want to work there. And I said, why are they sex changing fish? And she said, because they just want females in the pens. They don't want a male fish because these male fish jack early and they die. They just want females, and they're changing their sex. She quit and left, and that was so long ago. That was a long time ago. It went out of my mind. I didn't think about it anymore. I didn't know this girl too well. She seemed highly excitable. I couldn't think why they would do such a thing. It just didn't seem reasonable. But later on, as more information came, and I would just stumble across it in my reading about just not even about fish, but just the natural workings of the natural world, or trying to get some handle onto such a complicated mass of facts. But that they do want just females in the pens, and that the way they would get this would be by bathing a certain amount of female fry in testosterone, which effectively turned them into males. And they would make sperm and act like a male and spawn, and but because they were still genetically females, their chromosomes in their sperm would be XX primarily. And so that's how they did this. But I started thinking, my gosh, you mean to tell me that you give these fish enough sex hormones to change their sex, and then these offspring are from sex-changed fish? What is the level of hormones left in these fish in terms of excess hormones and what they call xenoestrogens and stuff, that hormones that come in from the outside? And then I learned by researching this one DFO scientist who was in with these experiments. He says that now they are doing just directly changing the sex of fish with estrogen, just treating them all with estrogen. So you've got these fish in the fish farms, heavily laden with estrogen, when it only takes a very, very small, infinitesimal amount of estrogen to affect a fetus, a human fetus. And so what is the outcome of treating fish in this way? And it was just through researching this that I ran across the genetically modified fish. And I learned that it came to being, it was born in at Queen's University and at another university back east, two researchers, and they got a patent on what they had been researching, and went into business with a guy who had had a patent on another process that went into modifying this fish. So together they came up with a fish that is part eel. It's part eel. It's a Pacific salmon that has Atlantic salmon genes, plus a rapid growth hormone. So you've got a fish that is hugely big. It grows 2 or 3 times as fast. It's aggressive, and it's got a patent on it. And these fish are being farmed in West Vancouver, right here in West Vancouver. And that they are getting them ready to be raised by fish farms. This is the first animal in all of history to be genetically modified with other genes sliced into its genome with a patent on it. Monsanto in the States is advising the United States of the desirability of getting okay to pass all the environmental assessments on it, that it's okay, that it's good for people, there's hardly any difference, it's bigger, it's more, it's just a better deal. You get a bigger, better bang for the buck. It's within a hair's breadth of being passed. And then Canada certainly is going to follow suit, because the eggs are being raised on the East Coast too right now as we speak. So you have, and then in the wings there's a Frankenpig. Another company is genetically modifying a pig. So you have a situation where in the future, if this goes, we could have, all animals could be genetically modified with a patent. See, and if one of these fish should escape and mate with wild fish, what have you, and start, if this should proliferate, then Monsanto or Relvcor or whoever has a patent on it can say, well, those salmon belong to us. They successfully have done that in Canada when their seeds went over into another farmer's field. So this is what we're looking at here, is a couple of companies owning practically every food source in the world. Now that's the most horrible thing I have ever heard of. And it's all being done hush hush, we formed a group called the Women's Party because we wanted a group of women to come together and less demand. We're more, as women, we still do most of the cooking. We still do most of the feeding of children. We don't know what we're feeding children. We don't know what we're feeding anybody because the government won't tell us. But now here we are faced with a situation where every chicken, every pig, every cow, every fish could be genetically modified, and you would not only have to pay for the purchase of the animal, you would have to pay Monsanto
A royalty.
or whatever company owns it.
Yeah.
And they can do whatever to it. It's the most outrageously horrible thing I think that is confronting humans right now in terms of the ability to have any kind of a say-so about our food source. Mm-hmm. We are what we eat. And that there is no proven benefit to eating these things, and there are so many potential hazards to it. There's even the grain now. There is studies showing that it's not good for humans to eat this genetically modified foods. That there are unknown hazards involved with this. Mm-hmm. And yet our governments, there's a Harper government, there's a Christy Clark government. Right here in British Columbia, we're rearing these genetically modified salmons that have a patent on them, waiting for it to be okay to raise them in fish farms and sell them commercially. Oh, it's enough to make you want to start a revolution, I'm telling you.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've never been very far away from that instinct. Right?
Well,
but one of the Women's Party, you mentioned that, and you've only just recently
yes.
used that phrase. Is this? Tell me about that. What's that going to be?
Well, we have only had 2 meetings. We're having our 3rd meeting next week when I go down to Vancouver. And we are looking at many things that so many of the women are already involved in certain areas, the criminal system, justice. A couple of university students are studying law. We have women who have been active in different activist social change groups. So we're sort of a motley crew in this sense, but we all have some sphere of interest that we would like to pursue as a group, because it takes a group now. You have to have some sort of sense of solidarity with your peers in order to bring something to the government, or to bring something to other organizations or other individuals and say, we don't like this, we're not going to stand for this, we're going to go blockade this facility in West Vancouver that's containing these genetically modified fish. Will you support us? Will you come with us? Will you? And this kind of thing frightens government a little bit. It slightly jars their
complacency.
Their facility for danger.
Yeah.
Is this dangerous? Could these women maybe do something? We wrote a letter to the Prime Minister a couple of weeks ago saying that we know these fish are there. We believe they should not be there. Why are they there without letting the public know, without giving the public instruction, or without any dialogue with the public about these fish being there, that they are they have not been okayed for any kind of environmental safety. They are patented. Why are you having a patent animal that hasn't been tested for its safety even on the soil of Canada?
Are they in net cages in the sea? Do you know?
They are in tanks.
In tanks, yeah.
Now the thing with this is they will say, well, they can't escape, they're in tanks. But you have a situation where you have eggs coming in, you have dead fish going out. What happens to the eggs coming in and dead fish and going out? We don't know.
No, and if they get approval, then presumably they will be in the ocean. Right?
Yes,
Yeah.
or they will certainly be in fish farms. Yes.
Yeah.
So it's enormously. Honestly, I never thought I would live to see such, where where life forms, because they're animal life forms. We're animals, you know, and my mind goes to very dark places with this patenting and genetically modifying an animal. And I wrote this in one of my blogs, which my daughter thought I was going to do too dark a place. But really, what is the thing in this world that's the real shortage of, that our doctors are always talking about shortages? It's human body parts. Well, if they can modify animals, you know, go up, pigs, horses, cows, why couldn't they modify a human animal, but modify it so that it has the brain of a mouse or something like that, so it would know it was being raised for human body parts? Does that sound like science fiction? That's where I got it, was science fiction. That's why I'm so frightened, because life, our government, our scientists, our corporations, our learning institutions are copying science fiction. And also, what are these experiments taking place in the universities? Why in the universities are we, Canadian universities, are we facilitating the genetic, the genetic destruction of animals by treating them as though they're playthings, as though they're of such insignificance that you can do whatever you want to them?
They exist to be exploited.
That's right.
Yeah, same thing. You've described yourself as an ecofeminist, and you made a really interesting remark at one point. You said many men at this point don't know what women want in a man. What do they want in a man?
Women want in a man?
What do women want in a man?
Well, do you know what, Don? I believe that because of the elevation of the male over the female in our history, recorded history, it's very difficult to know what women would want in a man, or what a man actually needs in a woman. I think both of these are really screwed up, because women, of course, they want a nice man, and a man who is a good family man, who help with children, who help with the money and help her if she works out too. Let's kind of divide up the household goods, our work. Nevertheless, men and women, we're still animals too. And men are forced into straitjackets that are not conducive to their well-being. Even though it's predominantly a masculine world, this does not necessarily benefit men who are not part of the elite. they primarily are locked into jobs that they are onerous to them, that don't give them enough time to think about anything, that don't allow them creativity, who are instead are force-fed games, hockey, all of the paraphernalia about masculine, the hockey star is the huge masculine star. But men, I believe, are unhappy with this at its core, because it doesn't sit right that they're supposed to do all of these things and be all of these things and yet still be a man. That it worries them, I believe, that they don't live up to the expectations of them. Some young men are just forgoing the whole thing, and it's saying we give up, we don't know what women want. And it's because women themselves don't know what they want. Because women want children, the majority want children. So many now are having trouble because they not only have the urge to be reproducers, but they have to be producers. They have to get a job, they have to work. They're torn between taking care of children and working at jobs that may or may not be significant to them. Nevertheless, they are earning now. There are more women in the workforce now than there are men in Canada. And they are being able, for the first time, to take care of themselves economically, so to speak. Well, this is totally, although they still make less, they still have enough that they don't actually need a man to feed them in the way that they have done in the past. So this has thrown the relation between the sexes into crisis. And I think it is a crisis, the relationship. If you look at what's happening with the libido, of male libido, for instance, pornography is huge. It's one of the biggest money makers in the world now, and it's growing. And it worries me that really young boys, that their first experiments with thinking about that sex and forming the idea of what it means to be a man is being conditioned by these pornography images of men being abusive to women and treating women in enormously disrespectful ways. So it's sick. The whole relationship between men and women is so out of kilter that it will take a revolution to right this deterioration of roles that men and women have had in the past. Like my mother and father, it wasn't a good situation. I'm not saying we should return to that, although their roles were clear, and everybody knew what they were supposed to do. But my mother was much smarter than my father and much more intelligent in the sense of decisions that were to be made concern the family. She always deferred to him because he was hard-headed and dominant, and but the roles were clear. And even up until, I'd say about 25 years ago, 20, they started becoming unclear and have
left us in great confusion.
Continued to be more unclear as time goes on, and you see everything out there in terms of relationships between men and women. You have I think the newest kind of phenomena, in a way I find so interesting, is that living together apart, where, you know, oh, what's one to think? However, the big problem is I don't think any species is going to be successfully happy that has a relationship where the rearing of the children depends on a continuing sexual attraction between two people, because, you know, it breaks down half the time. Doesn't that seem like a stupid way to raise children?
Yeah, it does.
Is in a situation where they're you have a 50-50 chance of being fatherless or motherless within a couple of years. So children have to have a very secure situation, community, where it doesn't matter who their mother, father likes or loves or sleeps with or doesn't like today but doesn't like tomorrow, where the children belong to this community. They're citizens in their own right. And you know, that's how we evolved as a species.
Yeah, it takes a village to raise a child.
Yeah, and we evolved. The First Nations, you know, the primitive cultures understood that it wasn't necessarily a good thing to have children thrown about by the affairs of their parents. So, yes.
It may be one of the good things that comes out of the tumult that we're in.
You very well could be right. It may be one of the good things is that, and I think the Israeli kibbutz had this concept in the beginning. I think it's kind of broken down now under increased capitalization of Israel, but I think also it's what in the 60s that these communes were about, let's have a situation where we can live together and the children will all be together and not everybody be parents. But the thing is, these young people didn't have the analysis down to where they could
or the
project
culture.
or the culture.
Like you know, really, when you talk about First Nations and small villages, you know, well, even in Nova Scotia where I live, you know, everybody grew up in that village the way a fish grows up in water. Everybody knew that all those kids were, in some sense, their own, you know, their kids, and that we were all looking out for each other's kids, and it was just an automatic assumption. But that's lost in most modern societies.
Yes.
And,
yes.
You said something in your most recent book about you mentioned a sense of being chosen.
Yes.
Tell me a little about that.
Well, excuse me, that was just this one incident in prison. The elder was there, and the elder would come every Friday. She came from the outside. She wasn't a prisoner. She brought traditional First Nations foods. She'd bring salmon, and she'd bring all kinds of things, berries fixed different ways, and so it was. I always looked forward to it. I was almost always the only non-native person there, but sometimes there would be other non-native women there too. But she treated us all the same, and we all got these same stories that she would tell before we went into drumming or making different things, braiding or weaving that she taught. And but she'd tell us these homilies. It's much like a Catholic priest, you know, or before the Mass or whatever, come out and give you your homily. But at this time, she started talking about the grandmothers and grandfathers. She told a lot of mythologies, and she's very learned in her culture and cultures, other First Nation cultures in Canada. she told, this time she was talking about the grandmothers and grandfathers. Now, I always liked these when she would talk about the grandmothers and grandfathers. And then she would talk to about the warrior women. There's a warrior women culture in the culture. And so she, and I like the warrior women best.
Why am I not surprised?
But she was talking about the grandmothers and grandfathers, and the Red Path. Now the Red Path is a First Nations program that the women could sign up for. That is, they could commit to. And I have to tell you that the women who are on this Red Path were primarily the women that I saw on the outside who actually straightened out. I saw one just in Vancouver last month. She stopped by, a young woman, and we had a really good chat, and I asked her if she was still on the Red Path, and she said yes, she was. And she looked wonderful. And I don't know if I should say this, but then nobody knows exactly who she is anyway, but she murdered a man and couldn't go back to her home because on the reserve, because they won't let you come back if you kill somebody. But she's on the Red Path and she looks wonderful. But we were all in this in the longhouse, and the elder was talking about the grandmothers and grandfathers, and she said, you know, they're always there. And she says, and sometimes if they think you're ready, they will choose you for something specific. And I looked at her and I thought, oh no, let's don't go there. And she said, yes, they will. And this other woman, First Nations woman, said, are you talking about death? And she says, no, I'm talking about being chosen. You can be chosen, and then you can't go back. There's no going back once you're chosen. And that you have to go on with it, and they won't let you go back. You must go forward.
Isn't that your experience? Isn't that exactly your experience?
Well, in the book, you know, it struck me as that. Yeah. But, however, I'm not too sure of that, of being chosen. I think you choose yourself. Is that...
yes, but the sense of that you can't go back, that you've been placed in a situation where you know what you know, you can't not know it anymore.
That's right.
And you know it drives you forward, and so in that sense you can't go back, right?
Well, it's true.
Yeah.
It's true.
And maybe that's the making of a warrior woman.
Well, maybe it is.
The unsinkable, irrepressible Betty Krawczyk, great-grandmother and unrepentant jailbird. Check her out online. At 83, she recently began a video blog. For The Green Interview, I'm Silver Donald Cameron. See you next time.